Future State, Superman versus Imperious Lex, issue 1. Mark Russell writing with Steve Pugh on the art. So, this is not as distantly in the future, I don't think, because this is before Superman's gone.
Well, I mean, obviously, Lois is still knocking around. They mentioned this being formed about 20 years ago. I mean, judging by Lois's age, I mean, it can only really be 30 or 40 years at most after current continuity,
and
right?
So this is where I think it becomes problematic with the timeline that they set out there, because really this doesn't feel like it has any connection other than what Mark Russell wanted to tell, the story, right? And so I just feel like this is a future state. That's why it's called Imperious Lex. It's not Superman or Action or whatever, you know? So I wouldn't get too hung up on the timeline.
It essentially feels like a different future state to a lot of the other books that we've had. And there's a couple that also fit in that category where it feels like it's a separate thing. And that's okay. I'm not really going to hold that against it too much.
No, I mean, because depending on how much of the sticks, right? Like Mark Russell's not lined up on a Superman book after this, so I'm pretty sure the story will be pretty self-contained.
I mean, this is basically just a 3-issue mini about Superman and Lex that he wanted to do.
Is this the 3-issue one?
This is the 3-issue one. This is the one that's not going to end until March when every other book's out.
Yeah, and I think it's by the end of March as well that it comes
And you know
out.
what though? I do like it, and it doesn't even have to be a future state. This is like almost like a what if future on the dangers of you know, how do I want to put this delicately?
Imperialism.
There we go. Imperialism, colonialism, and you know, and I can't think of two characters better to do that than Superman and Lex.
I mean, the point where Lex
dynamic
is stealing from all the other planets so he can showcase basically giant museums and set pieces is like, yeah, that's imperialism 101.
Well,
right
to
there.
explain the context here of the issue, we're in the near future where the United Planets have a headquarters on Earth. We've got a Guardian. We're in a meeting with all the various heads of all the representatives of all the various worlds and states.
Right.
And they're arguing about Lex Luthor, who wants to join. He now rules a planet called Lexor, because of course he does. And Superman shows up to explain why he thinks Lex now wants to join the United Planets when he didn't before. And he tells this story that Lex was basically using giant robots that look kind of like World of Worlds, but more robotic. And he was going around and just pillaging other planets for their resources and their riches, and using that to make his planet rich, so that all of his people loved him because he was giving them this great standard of living. So, and of course, Superman went in to put a stop to it, and burned his factory, building the robots to the ground.
He noticed. Superman noticed that these big Lex robots, snake centipede things, actually look kind of scared, right? Like when Superman was dealing with them, and so he deactivated them and stored them on the moon, there, so Lex can't use them, and in doing so, took away basically the one way that Lexor could kind of support itself.
On Lexor's moon, might I add, not Earth's moon.
Yeah, on
Lexor's moon.
Right,
which can I just say? Of course, Lex picked a planet that's orbiting a red sun. Of course he did.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he obviously did that.
Right. and like I like that the United Planets were like, oh, we're finally rid of Lex. Like even they all understand how big of an a-hole he is, right?
Yeah.
And so they're all ready just to deny. And Lois kind of is like, well, let's listen to Clark. And at the end of Clark's story, he's kind of like, well, no, like, yeah, Lex is a problem, but the people on his planet, it's not their fault he's such a jerk.
Yeah.
So,
and
like,
that's kind of the interesting thing, is that he mentions when he tries to tell the population of the planet that all of the reason why they have all these riches is because of them stealing from everyone else. They don't know anything about this. They see offense, like, no, we have to feel guilty that we've been living so well. But again, it's not their fault. Lex has done this to them. So he's basically saying, all these people on this planet, we can't just abandon them, and because this planet's going to go down the toilet.
Right.
I mean, Lois makes an interesting point, which says, at worst, or at best, they're gullible and have been, duped by Lex. But at worst, they're willing accomplices. So I think that's something to consider.
And after the year that I've had here, that line really struck home.
Yeah,
you know?
but I mean, it speaks to Superman that he wants to believe that they can be better, that they aren't culpable, to the full extent.
Right, and this is why I love Superman as a character, right? Like, because even though this whole planet's been told how terrible the Kryptonian was and how he ruined Lex's life and stuff, and he's still giving them a shot because again, it's not their fault, and so I love that. I love that his powers are draining under the red sun, but he still manages to get out of there after destroying their main factory.
Yeah, my favorite thing about the planet is the propaganda where the news reports are saying, in other news, the market is like, for the 10th straight year, everything's projected to go up again. Everything's good, and there's like this pro-fascist, like, everything's perfect and hunky-dory because I'm the best leader ever. Lex is actually very self-aware, though, because when he's talking to his robot butler dude, he mentions that as soon as he runs out of things to give the people, like the fear that he has over them will turn to they'll fear him. They'll fear living under him more than they fear his like wrath, and that's when it becomes a problem. So he's very self-aware.
He refers to himself as a dictator, right?
He does, yeah.
He knows exactly what he's doing.
He says, "If you ever see what happens to a dictator when the candy runs out, like I think that's the line he uses.
Yeah.
So he knows quite well what he is. So he's self-aware at least. But yeah. So Superman asks Lois to object and say no, we should consider letting them in. And at the end of the issue, she does. She's not happy about it. She feels very conflicted about doing so, but she does it.
I also love that you can tell Mark Russell's like, I don't want to say contempt, but like how stuff is governed and how like, okay, well, we'll talk about it and we'll have an hour break to really think about it.
There's the bit where like it's the mandatory hour. This is procedure. It's like, look, we'll go away for an hour, we'll think about it, and then we'll come back and vote that he won't join.
Right.
Like, there's no real debate. No one's changing their mind.
And then the same thing here, which then Superman took really advantage of, because that's when he talks to Lois about now, objecting, because I also love the sand guy in the back, who's like, yeah, let's bury them all in sand.
Yeah, jar, yeah, that cracked me up. There's a couple of little good jokes in there. So
like, if you read this and you are looking for other stuff to read, this is very much the same tone as his Flintstones, with the same artist, even with Pugh. So I was getting a lot of vibes there, because there's a lot of societal things that he's breaking down through the comic mediums.
Pretty much what I expect from Russell at this point.
Yeah, I mean, although some of his other stuff at this point was more superhero and less, it was a little more coded than this, where it's much more in the front like that. Because like Wonder Twins was still a superhero story that was getting on about societal problems.
I think it was never. It was barely subtext, if you could even call it subtext in that book.
Right, but that's what I mean. So if you think that was subtext, then this is way more upfront, and he's not even trying to hide it.
Yeah, this is borderline supertext.
Right. Exactly. So, but yeah. So if you did, I mean, and the art is just as good as the stuff that Pugh did in the Flintstones. Like, everything to me looks as it should. I like the alien designs too. They feel just enough alien, almost kind of Star Trek aliens, where like, yeah, they're kind of human, but alien enough.
Except one who's just a dog, basically. Is a humanoid dog.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of them.
Gotta have the dog alien.
Now, the ending is that, okay, since you're arguing that they should join for this reason, it means that Earth is now its sponsor, and Lois, you're now the representative to Lexar, so that kind of sets up where we'll be going next issue. So, yeah, it's definitely different from the other Future State books, right down to the fact that it has just a different tone, where it's not doing the same thing. It's being its own quirky. I mean, maybe quirky is not the right word, but it definitely has a sense of humor that's very different from the rest of the Future State books. So I guess you just need to keep that in mind if you're considering reading it, that it is kind of its own little
definitely.
thing.
If you've never read Mark Russell before, you might have to adjust. But if you've read a lot of his work, then kind of what you're getting into. Like, I read the Thanagarian as he's yelling everything, even though I have no vibe elsewhere, just based off of the art. He looks like he's very much into diplomacy and whatnot. So,
he is always drawn like, hands up, mouth
Uh-huh.
wide open, whenever he's
Yeah.
talking.
He's very intense.
He is, yeah.
And that goes to the kind of sense of humor that Pete's talking about, where it is almost like a what's the word I'm looking for? Satire
Yeah, there's definitely satire in here.
of politics and whatnot. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, what are you giving this issue then, Matt?
I'm gonna give this an 8.5. I really, really liked it.
Connor?
I'm going to give it a 6.5. I like it, but I do think...
Oh.
Well, no, it's a perfectly fine score. I like it, but I do think that the message and the point does overtake the actual story a little bit, where I was no longer reading the story. I was reading the analogy, what it was saying. And I want to think about that. I want that to be there, but I don't want it to be what I'm reading.
I'm actually closer to your score than I am Matt's. I just chuckled because
Wow.
it was such a stark difference from the 8.5 all the way down to 6.5. But I don't really feel like anything you said up until now had really prepared me for such a difference.
But,
But
6.5 is a fine score. It's not a bad book. It's solid.
yeah, I'm going with a 7. I think it's fine. I definitely chuckled a few times. I kind of like some of the things it's doing with Lex. It's one of those things though where it feels so out there that Lex is now running his own planet that there's kind of a almost I mean, obviously, there's nothing wrong with an Elseworld, but it feels almost just like a goofy Elseworld to me. So it's fine. It's a fun little exploration, but I don't know. It's not hit me in a way that I feel like, oh, this is a special story.
Do you know what I think the problem is?
Mm-hmm.
The comics already did President Lex, like years ago at this point.
Thanks, go, Matt.
And now, obviously, after the past 4 years, how do you top that? You can't go back and do President Lex again. We already did that. And so what do you do? Well, give him a planet. Just give him a whole planet.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only logical next step.